Joe, talk a little bit about the history of the CAFE standards, how they came to be, and why they're so important today.
Well, it's interesting. They're important today for the original reason, but they're more important for an environmental reason today than they were when they started out. So this is in the 70s. You had the Arab oil embargo. Everyone was worried, wow, we're dependent on these foreign sources of oil. What do? Well, we have all these cars. So if we made them more fuel efficient, we'd be using less fuel and thereby be less oil dependent. Now, but even in the 70s, people were conscious that, the main source of pollution that people are exposed to comes from automobiles in all cities. So you had kind of a twofer here. Well, we can deal with an energy security issue, and we can also deal with an environmental issue, because the fewer vehicle miles traveled, the less emissions from tailpipes there would be, and that would be better for pollution. It's not a coincidence that California is a lot cleaner. Los Angeles, for example, is a lot cleaner today than it was in the 70s. A big reason for that is CAFE. The political impulse for it was the Arab oil embargo, because that completely captured people's imagination and attention. But the machinery of it was all, the environmental side of it was all EPA, and that was driving a lot of it.
Robin, what's that level of cooperation like now, and how has it been? Because not only automakers are on board, but it seems like the government has gone out of their way to make sure everyone kind of buys into this. There doesn't seem to be the level of opposition that you see in other sort of federal programs.
Yes, definitely. The CAFE standards are, for environmental regulation, are one of the least controversial of the regulations, and that's because there are actually benefits for average consumers. As Joe mentioned, in the state of California, you've seen dramatic reductions in air pollution in cities. I mean, I grew up in Southern California and I couldn't breathe on certain days. And so the state got very aggressive in conjunction with the federal government and decided to be more aggressive with automobile emission standards and reduce that. I mean, there are health consequences to that. So there's a measurable and discernible difference for consumers. Number two, you have a cost benefit. So when you get more miles per gallon, you get more miles per dollar, and that translates to everyone who's on the road. They're saying, hey, it costs me less to fill up my car. And even as oil prices rise, as you get more miles per gallon, you're still paying less than you otherwise would if you had a less efficient car. So I think both of those mean that there's, real benefit for your average consumer, and then from a congressional standpoint and a bipartisan standpoint, you have the environmental benefits and you have the national security benefits. You're creating jobs in the U.S. by having feedstocks, for example, and fuels that aren't, from foreign countries. And then overall, you're decreasing the oil consumption. And so there's something in it for everyone, and I think that gets a lot of unification around this standard.
But consumers, when they go to shop for a new car, the way they see this sort of progress is the number on the window sticker. Right. Does that reflect the real world miles per gallon you get, and how does that differ from the formula that is involved in CAFE?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the number itself is actually not directly related to the CAFE standard. What it says is this vehicle, under ideal circumstances, by the way, not actually road circumstances, will get X. But so it's not connected directly, because CAFE, by the way, it's corporate average fuel economy. So that number applies to the whole range of vehicles by that particular manufacturer. But from a consumer standpoint, if you're interested in efficiency, you want to buy a cleaner, more efficient car, it gives you a way to compare. So yeah, I guess what that sticker is different on an F-150 than it is on a Honda Accord, than it is on a Prius, than it is on a Volt. Those are all different numbers. And they are relatively right. So you can be pretty confident if you have a higher number that car is likely to get better gas mileage. But it's not directly connected. There's to the CAFE standard. It is, however, a requirement of the regulatory process to have that.
I think One other thing I would add to that is under the CAFE program, there are incentives for certain technologies to accelerate the adoption of new, more efficient technologies on vehicles. And so the automakers, when they're producing these cars and introducing these, they get the equivalent of a miles per gallon credit, which gets them a CAFE number, which for a particular vehicle that would not be the one that you see on the sticker. So there's kind of two things going on there.
What would be an example of a type of vehicle that would get sort of a special credit like that? Or, you know, electric vehicles, do they get a higher priority for that?
Absolutely. Electric vehicles, flex fuel vehicles, so ones that use more than one fuel, compressed natural gas vehicles. There are a number. There are also technologies. There are air conditioning technologies. There are lightweighting technologies. There are turbocharging or supercharged. There are a number of technologies at any given time that might receive a credit.
It seems like, I mean, this might help explain why you're seeing a lot of these sort of alternative fuel vehicles and technologies on the road. And it seems like the CAFE standards have kind of spurred this innovation, not only in, you know, engines and fuels and electrification, but also the things you mentioned, making cars lighter, dealing with the climate controls to try and get them more efficient so that they end up using less fuel. It's really kind of spurred this this innovation.
Well, you wouldn't have flex fuel vehicles on the road if it weren't for the CAFE standard, basically. I mean, that's how American auto companies in particular are able to continue to producing trucks and, you know, pickup trucks and SUVs, because they get a credit for putting flex fuel vehicles on the road.
Now, the stated goal of the CAFE standards is to get to 54.5 miles per gallon across the fleet by 2025. That sounds like a big number compared with where we are now. How do automakers hope to get to that number? How can they?
The fact is, there's a fair amount of optimism that we can get a lot further than where we are today. So I think all automakers feel like, yeah, there is a pathway to move down the road. But the actual 54.5, which again, it comes from an algorithm, that's why it's a weird number, 54.5 miles per gallon, that's going to be really hard unless there's a really strong increase in the number of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. I'll just go out on a limb and say they won't be able to get there without some kind of credits. Now, already built into the proposal is credits for electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Okay, so that gives you a big advantage. But automakers can't make people buy various vehicles, so they're gonna have to have some flexibility in getting some credits to do that.
I think one of the important features of CAFE is that what you said, Joe, it's that consumers need to buy the cars. It's not the ones that are produced. It's average across the vehicles that manufacturers actually sell.
They don't get credit for just having put the time into
Setting
make a
them
vehicle.
on the lot. Exactly. So, you know, you need to make sure from an automaker perspective that you're providing cars that consumers actually want, that meet their needs and that are affordable. And so the CAFE standards need to account for that when they're developing the newest rules. They need to make room for that diversity of consumer choice.
As far as the rules, I've heard this is a big year for the CAFE standards. What happens, you know, in the course of making these rules to ensure that they're on the right path? What's going to happen this year in this process?
So there's what's called a midterm evaluation. So CAFE standards are developed in 4-year increments. And they had developed in 2012 an extended range of 4-year periods. And so for 2022 to 2025, they built in a midterm review process to ensure that they're tracking and able to actually get to that 54.5. And so that process, called the midterm evaluation, it's a partnership between EPA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, and the California Air Resources Board. Thank you. And they kick off this year, it's a 2-year process, with what's called the technical assessment report. And that report is basically looking at the landscape of technologies that are in the marketplace today and those are that on the cusp of being introduced in the marketplace. And what are they, where should the incentives go, what are the economic implications of the various things, and it's basically a holistic analysis of the state of the automotive market today.
You mentioned that, who knows whether automakers will be able to reach those thresholds. Is there any evidence that publicly anyway they're pushing back against these standards? It seems like everyone's gotten involved and kind of agrees that the standards are important, that they're in place, but are the automakers going to try to dilute that number or some of the credits that make the number?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a fair amount of time with the auto industry folks, and we don't sense it. I don't sense that there is a pushback. There is still a fear that they can't really make it because, again, as I mentioned a bit ago, that 54.5 depends on a certain number of electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles being in the fleet. And so if they don't get that, then they have to make it up someplace else. And there is fear that maybe they won't be able to make it up someplace else. So I think in this midterm evaluation that Robin talked about, there is going to be a lot of, I don't want to say pushback because I think it's actually fair to say, look, we can only go so far.
It'll be a negotiation.
Yeah,
what credits can we get to incentivize what technologies and how affordable are they and how likely are consumers likely to buy them?
But I mean, the flex fuel vehicle exemption, addition, credit from the last round is an example of that. They said, okay, we can't get there, but well, if EPA goes, well, if you can give us this environmental benefit by making flex fuel vehicles, then we can give you credit and get to the number. Something like that will have to happen.
Could consumers rightly be worried that maybe what comes out of the standards might limit their choice of vehicles, that they're going to be sort of forced to buy these small fuel-efficient cars when the current landscape is all about crossover SUVs, big trucks, SUVs? Those are the vehicles that Americans really like and have shown that they want to buy.
There's a tension there for sure, because you have certain segments of the population who want the standards to go much further, and then others that are saying, hey, I want my SUV. But the CAFE standards have built in two separate sets of standards. You have one for light-duty passenger vehicles and another for what's called light trucks, which are SUVs, minivans, and actual trucks, like Ford F-150s, for example. And so these have differing expectations for their ramp-up of number of miles per gallon or equivalent grams per mile. And so they've built in the ability with those tiers to preserve that consumer choice in the marketplace.
But it's a fear. I mean, if you take the top 10 selling vehicles in the United States of America, number 1 is an F-150, number 2 is a Chevy Silverado, number 3 is a Dodge Ram. 1, 2, 3. By quite a bit. Then you get into the passenger cars, and even the cars that you get into below that are like a Camry, a Toyota Camry, and a Honda Accord. They are not the lowest, the most efficient vehicles that either of those companies make either.
And and to that point, you have a tension between Japanese automakers and U.S. automakers. Right. So you have Japanese automakers who, by and large, make smaller, cars, and then you have the U.S. automakers who offer a lot of the bigger cars that consumers seem to like quite a bit. So how do you make room for both of those and preserve that choice is going to be something that needs to be front and center, as well as the economic implications for your average consumer.
What's the best way to, squeeze more efficiency out of these bigger engines that do use a lot of gasoline? I mean, they've lightened vehicles, as the Ford F-150 was switched to an aluminum body, and that helped with that. How else can we continue an upward trend among those vehicles that are so popular?
Well, I mean, we have a strong view on this, it turns out, and that is that you need to really get to be able to keep bigger cars on the road, you need higher compression engines. Higher compression engines are more efficient. So if you have a higher compression engine, you get more efficiency, obviously better mileage. That actually has pollution benefits too. The problem is high compression engines require a high octane fuel. And right now, Americans are used to buying low octane fuels for cheaper prices. So something has to come together with engines, engine technology, and fuel in the market that would encourage people to buy encourage automakers to make higher compression engines. So that's one thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, and there's a lot of discussion going on around this right now. I mean, and there's a multi-million-dollar, multi-year initiative going on at the Department of Energy on this notion of matching the vehicles with the fuels. They call it the co-optimization of vehicles and fuels. And they're looking at, if you introduce a new fuel to the market, i.e. a high-octane fuel, what sort of vehicle technologies would those enable? What sort of benefits could you have? And how does that happen? I think that's the most important thing, is a lot of times you have things in government that aren't bringing it down to the practical level and the actual implementation.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that that's a huge piece of this initiative from the Department of Energy, I think, is very powerful. And I really hope that we, as a nation, can benefit from that in these CAFE standards and really accounting for that in a meaningful way and introducing action or spurring action to actually get the fuels you need to be able to introduce those technologies.
Most people only know octane from the numbers they see at the pump. The minimum that they see is usually 87, and then there's the mid-grade 89, and the premium 91. And to them, that's high octane fuel, but those are mostly reserved currently for higher end vehicles, the high performance vehicles. Does it have to be that way? It sounds like high octane fuels has a lot of benefits for all Americans, not just people who drive more expensive cars.
We were at a presentation about a month ago, and Ford was talking about just using 91 octane fuels in virtually any car on the road today. They can get a 1% to 2% performance benefit. Now that's small compared to the price differential, so there's no value in that at the moment, the way the fuels are priced, because there's such a premium on premium fuel. But that just shows that even in existing vehicles, you can get a benefit if we had a higher minimum. And you could do it a lot more affordably than they do now, because it's actually, they charge a premium just because they can, because it's used only for expensive vehicles. So, I think you can overcome that issue, and you can not only develop better engines, but you can certainly have engines today that perform better than we're used to them.
I'm sorry.
So there's another point to the high compression engine. When you're looking, so we've been talking just about CAFE, and that's fine, but if you have a high compression engine with a very small amount of hybridization, electrification of that vehicle, so that it's a lot cheaper, so that consumers could buy it, you can get a significant reduction in greenhouse gases over time too, because that just in effect supercharges the reductions that you get. It's not really supercharging in the auto sense, but a dramatic improvement in the efficiency. But you need the high compression engine plus the small hybridization to do that. So you can attack two problems at once: the fuel efficiency, which of course has environmental benefits by itself, but in addition to that, you can get significant CO2 reductions.
And I think that's important in the wake of Paris, where transportation was virtually ignored, and particularly light duty transportation. And so this could be a powerful and affordable way to just drive consumer behavior to get reductions, rather than kind of a top-down approach.
Yeah. Just to put some numbers around that, right now today, 25 to 27% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from cars. That's expected to grow by 120% between now and 2050 at least. Maybe it's more, but it's a lot. So leaving that piece of the puzzle out of a climate strategy it's not a good idea.
It's only part of the problem.
Yeah. And it's pretty universally recognized by experts who were in Paris that the Paris Agreement, quote, did not go far enough in terms of transportation. And basically, if you're going to rely on bike lanes and mass transit, you're just not going to get those big reductions from nearly 3 billion cars that'll be on the road.
A lot of people are concerned about climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it has to make economic sense, some of these solutions. People are motivated by the price at the pump when they fill up. How do you reduce the cost structure of high octane fuels so that more people have access to them?
It turns out that there is a cheaper solution to this, because to get high octane, a high compression engine requires high octane. The cheapest form of high octane is alcohol. And today, most of that alcohol could come from corn, so in the form of ethanol, which is a very well-established fuel. 10% of all the fuel in the country is already ethanol. And we mentioned earlier flex fuel vehicles, they can go up to 85% ethanol, which again is alcohol. Alcohol has a higher octane number than gasoline. So it's a cheap way to increase the octane. And over and above that, we have vast reserves of natural gas, and ethanol can be made from natural gas. So we have cheap natural gas, which is far cheaper than petroleum on an energy unit basis. So if we can get that transportation, or get the natural gas into the transportation fuel system, it's all domestic. So it goes way back to the roots that we talked about earlier on in terms of energy security. It's all here. We have all the natural gas for at least a century, and it's cleaner, and it's cheaper. So this octane enhancement thing actually can kill many birds with one stone here, while improving the environment, while improving automobile efficiency. So yeah, we have a nice package in the country that can solve lots of problems.
Lots of jobs here.
How
Better
do you
here than elsewhere.
There's also a benefit, I know what you want to say. There's another benefit too, is that ethanol as an octane enhancer is itself much cleaner. Forget about greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions. Right now, the way gasoline is enhanced, the octane number that you get in gasoline today, as much as a third of a gallon of your gasoline is going to have aromatics in it, benzene, toluene, xylene. Those are all needed to increase the octane number. Well, alcohol does the same thing, and it won't hurt you. Benzene, toluene, xylene, ethyl benzene, those aromatics, they've been identified as carcinogens or toxins right off. We don't need to do any more studies to find out that benzene is bad for you. Okay, you can substitute that with alcohol, which doesn't have any of those toxic characteristics when it's actually burned.
the midterm evaluation is happening this year, the first part of that process, the technical assessment report. How do people make their voice heard? How do they weigh in on this? Because this obviously affects a lot of people, consumers and people who care about clean air and some of the other issues we've been talking about. How do they provide their feedback?
So when EPA publishes rules and something like this technical assessment report, they are required to provide a comment period of, I think it differs depending on the particular rule, but it's anywhere from 30, sometimes 90 days, where any citizen can actually comment on the substance of the proposal that EPA puts out. So that's a way to get your voice heard. And we certainly would encourage that, because citizens don't know that they actually could have a voice in this. It's important that it's a substantial contribution. It's not just kind of something that, is just uninformed. You want to make sure that it actually relates to the content of what EPA has proposed, but it is a really great way for informed citizens to make their voice heard.
Well, there's been a lot more attention in the last few months about this issue, considering how important it is. And I think that a lot of people maybe assume that these kinds of laws and regulations get cooked up behind closed doors and the public doesn't have a say. But this is an example where EPA really does listen to people.
I think so. I think in this particular case, because so much But the implementation of this thing is going to be dependent on consumer behavior.
Mhm.
That's just a fact. I mean, some people are going to want a lot of small cars. Some people are going to want electrification. Some people are saying, "Don't touch my SUV." I mean, there are a lot of, there's a whole market. I mean, the market is made up of all those people who have these different views, and they should be made. They should make them known.
Not only are people, is car choice, that seems to be sort of a bedrock principle of the standards, but safety as well. We talked about some of the ways that manufacturers can squeeze more efficiency out of these cars. They're using lighter materials. Will that compromise, driver safety and passenger safety?
So one of the things that's really important to CAFE and integral to the analysis when they're developing these standards is the implications for consumer safety. Because, you have NHTSA involved, which that is their kind of bailiwick, right? They're focused on safety in transportation.
Safety's in their
Yeah,
name.
exactly. And so it is important, and it's integrated within the CAFE consideration. So it is not something where they're just going to regulate safe vehicles out of existence, or willfully increase fatality rates, for example. And
In any case, all the evidence is safety is getting better and better and better. At the same time, fuel economy is getting better. There are people who want to, make a big issue of that they're at war with each other. But in reality, in addition to the improvements that manufacturers are making to engines, they're making all kinds of improvements, safety improvements. So it's actually all working together in a pretty nice way. And in fact, traffic deaths are coming down pretty dramatically over time.
Okay, thank you very much.
thank
Thank you. Thank you.